When you've truly defeated a narcissist, not just set a boundary, not just ended the relationship, but fundamentally disrupted their ability to use you as supply, the first and most striking sign is something most people don't expect: complete silence. And I want to be very clear about what this silence is, because it's profoundly different from the narcissist typical patterns of stonewalling, ghosting, or temporary withdrawal. This isn't the silent treatment used as punishment. This isn't the strategic absence designed to make you anxious and pursue them. This isn't even the post-discard silence while they focus on new supply. This is something else entirely. This is the silence of genuine defeat, precisely because it's so uncharacteristic of narcissistic behavior. Think about the narcissistic behavior. Think about the narcissist's typical response patterns when you've tried to leave before, when you've set boundaries, when you've challenged their control. There's always some form of reaction. Hoovering attempts, those manipulative efforts to draw you back in with promises of change, displays of vulnerability, or reminders of good times. Dies at first, or rage, the fury at being challenged, being left, having their control threatened, or smear campaigns, the systematic destruction of your reputation to punish you for daring to establish autonomy. The narcissist, who hasn't been truly defeated, will engage. They'll fight to regain control, fight to restore supply, fight to reassert their dominance in the dynamic. Tolerate the idea that you've removed yourself from their influence. So they pursue, they provoke, they attempt to reinstate the connection in whatever form they can achieve. But when you've truly defeated them, when you've established such complete psychological sovereignty that they recognize, on some level, that their tactics simply won't work anymore, the response is different. It's nothing. No hovering, no rage, no smear campaign. No attempts to remain in your awareness through mutual friends. No breadcrumbs. No accidental encounters. Nothing. This silence is the narcissist explicit acknowledgement that they've lost access. Person who's been conditioned to expect ongoing manipulation, ongoing attempts at contact, ongoing drama. This silence can actually be disorienting at first. Yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting the hoovering attempt, bracing for the smear campaign. But it doesn't come. Doesn't come reveals something crucial about narcissistic psychology. The narcissistic pursues when they believe pursuit might work. They hoover when they think there's a vulnerability they can exploit, a crack in your defenses they can widen. They rage when they believe their rage will affect you, will make you doubt yourself, will create the reaction they're seeking. Dick will either draw you back into defense mode, which reinstates contact and gives them supply, or when it will punish you in ways that provide them narcissistic satisfaction. But when none of these strategies are viable, when the narcissist recognizes that you are truly fundamentally unavailable, that your boundaries are impenetrable, that you have achieved genuine indifference, there's no point in engagement. You're no longer a source of supply they can access. You're not even a source of negative supply through your reaction to their provocations. You've become, in psychological terms, a closed system, impermeable. Time of a fundamental level, from a place of supply seeking, moves on to more accessible sources. Don't recognize at first. This is what true defeat looks like from their perspective. The recognition that you cannot be manipulated, cannot be drawn back in, cannot be made to react, cannot be used. Narcissist reaches this recognition, engagement stops, because engagement no longer serves their needs. But here's what's important to understand. This silence is also the narcissist protecting themselves. To engage with you at this point would be an admission of their loss. It would confirm that they need you more than you need them, that their tactics failed, that you succeeded in extracting yourself from their influence. The narcissist's grandiosity cannot tolerate disadmission. So rather than continue to pursue and face repeated rejection, rather than continue to attempt manipulation and have it fail, rather than rage and receive no response, they go silent, disappear from your life as completely as you disappeared from theirs psychologically. And this silence often extends beyond just direct contact. They stop monitoring your social media. They stop asking mutual friends about you. They stop engineering situations where you might cross paths, because all of that would be evidence of ongoing investment, ongoing care about what you're doing, ongoing inability to move on, to attain to themselves as much as to others, that they're unaffected, that they've moved on, that you were easily replaced. The silence becomes their way of saving face, of preserving whatever remains of their grandiose self-image. Take them because I don't care, not because I can't access them anymore. This is the internal narrative the silence allows them to maintain. For the person who's achieved this level of separation, who's established boundaries so complete that the narcissist has gone silent, this can actually be the confirmation you need, because the narcissist who's still invested, who still believes they have access, who still thinks their tactics might work, the narcissist doesn't go silent. They engage, they pursue, they provoke, tells you, you've done it, you've established such complete separation that there's nothing left for the narcissist to engage with. You don't recognize at first. You're no longer a supply, no longer accessible in any form that serves their needs. When a narcissist goes truly silent, it's not because they've finally respected your boundaries. It's because they've recognized those boundaries are impenetrable, and their ego can't survive repeated confirmation of that reality. But the silence, while striking, is often accompanied by something equally revealing, something that others in the narcissist life begin to notice and comment on. When you've truly defeated a narcissist, when you've removed yourself so completely that they can no longer access you as supply or regulation, there's often a visible deterioration in their functioning that becomes impossible for them to hide. I want to be clear about what I mean by this, because it's not about taking satisfaction in someone's suffering. This psychological reality of what happens when a narcissist loses a primary source of regulatory supply, particularly when that source was someone with the depth and capacity of a super empath, or someone who was providing crucial stabilization for the narcissist's fragmented self. Remember what we've discussed about how certain people function in the narcissist's psychological economy. They're not just providing validation or attention. They're providing something more fundamental. They're helping regulate the narcissist's nervous system, containing their emotional chaos, reflecting back a coherent sense of self, providing the psychological structure that the narcissist cannot generate internally. They extract themselves completely when they establish boundaries so firm that the narcissist cannot access them in any form. The narcissist loses a crucial regulatory function. Without that external regulation, their internal instability begins to manifest in ways that become visible to others. This might show up professionally. The narcissist who always seems so competent, so successful, so in control, suddenly begins making uncharacteristic errors. Deadlines, their work quality declines. They have conflicts with colleagues or superiors that they can't smooth over with their usual charm. Projects fail. First, opportunities evaporate. The professional image they've carefully cultivated begins to crack in ways that others notice and comment on. It shows up in their relationships. The narcissist cycles through new supply sources with increasing rapidity and decreasing discretion. Recognize it first. Where they once maintained some level of strategic control over their image, now they're visibly chaotic, starting and ending relationships with dramatic intensity, creating scenes, burning bridges with people they once cultivated carefully. The pattern becomes so obvious that even people who weren't previously aware of the narcissist's pathology begin to see it. TEFs as visible instability, weight changes, signs of substance abuse, erratic behavior, mood swings that can no longer be concealed behind the polished facade. The narcissist who always seemed to have it together now appears to be falling apart, and it's visible enough that people in their orbit become concerned or uncomfortable. This deterioration happens because you weren't just another person in narcissist life. You were serving a crucial structural function. You were one of the load-bearing walls, holding up their psychological architecture. Daring removed yourself completely. When you made yourself completely unavailable, that structure began to collapse. The narcissist tries to replace you, of course. They seek new supply sources, new people to provide what you provided. But here's what they discover. What you provided can't be easily replaced. Your specific combination of depth, perception, emotional capacity, and tolerance for their pathology. This was rare. The no supply sources they find either lack the depth to provide the same regulatory function, or they're too healthy to tolerate the narcissist's behavior long enough to become enmeshed. So the narcissist exists in a state of chronic dysregulation that they're increasingly unable to mask. The performance of competence, of having it together, of being enviable, this performance requires energy and stability they no longer have. Dejan, the you-law with Kerfens breaks down. The reality beneath becomes visible to others. People in the narcissist's life start to notice something's wrong. They might not understand exactly what's happening. They might not connect it to your departure, but they see the decline. They comment on it to each other. They express concern. They begin to question the image the narcissist has always projected. Deterioration is evidence of something important. You mattered more than the narcissist ever acknowledged, or perhaps even realized. Thighs, you were responsible for their well-being, you weren't. But because you were performing an enormous amount of invisible labor that was keeping their system functional, you were absorbing their projections, managing their emotions, providing continuity and coherence, offering a stable presence that allowed them to maintain their functioning in other areas of life. When you removed that labor, when you stopped performing those functions and made yourself completely unavailable, the narcissist had to face their own internal chaos without the buffer you provided. Chaos, which you had been containing, began to spill out into other areas of their life in ways they couldn't control or conceal. This isn't about you being responsible for them. This is about recognizing the toll that managing a narcissist's internal world takes, and understanding that when you stop doing that work, the narcissist has to either develop internal resources they've never cultivated, which is unlikely without significant intervention, or visibly destabilize. Deterioration others witness as the narcissist, without the scaffolding you provided. It's what they actually are when they're not being held together by someone else's extraordinary emotional labor. Becomes visible precisely because you've removed yourself so completely that they can't access you to restore that stabilizing function. Decline serves as confirmation, not just to you, but to others, of something the narcissist always denied, that they needed you far more than they ever admitted, and that your departure created a void in their functioning that they cannot fill. Person who is holding them together disappears completely. The narcissist doesn't just lose supply, they lose the architecture that was keeping their chaos contained. True defeat that's particularly striking because it involves such a dramatic behavioral shift, one that reveals just how completely you've disrupted the narcissist's ability to maintain their false self in the environment where defeat occurred. When you've truly defeated a narcissist, they often leave. Not just the relationship, but the entire context. They relocate geographically, abandon established social circles, burn bridges with communities they spent years cultivating, and essentially start over in an environment where no one knows what happened. Different from the narcissist's typical pattern of moving on to new supply within the same general environment, usually the narcissist maintains their territory. They keep their friend groups, their professional networks, their social standing. They might replace you with someone new, but they do so within the established framework of their life, often making sure you're aware of it, often positioning the new supply in ways designed to make you feel replaced or inferior. But when they've been truly defeated, when the collapse was witnessed, when the mask slipped publicly, when their narrative couldn't be maintained, staying in that environment becomes untenable. But it's because everyone in that space has seen something the narcissist cannot allow to remain in collective memory, evidence of their fundamental fraudulence. Think about what true defeat means in practical terms. It involves the narcissist's tactics being exposed, their lies being revealed, their manipulations becoming visible to people who previously only saw the polished facade. Maybe you documented their behavior and shared it with key people. Maybe their mask slipped in a public setting in ways that couldn't be explained away. Maybe enough people compared notes and realized the pattern. First, maybe professional consequences materialized that couldn't be hidden. Whatever the specific mechanism, the result is the same. The narcissist's carefully constructed image in that environment is destroyed, and they cannot rebuild it. Too many people know too much. The cognitive dissonance, required to maintain the false self in the face of collective awareness becomes impossible. And here's what's crucial to understand. The narcissist's entire identity is built on that false self, on the image they project, on the narrative they control. Reputation is irreparably damaged in an environment when the narrative cannot be restored. The narcissist experiences something close to psychological annihilation. They cannot be who they need to be in that space anymore. Two don't recognize it first, so they leave. And they don't leave quietly or gradually. They often leave dramatically, burning bridges as they go. They might suddenly move to a different city or even a different country. They might abandon careers they spent decades building, ties with entire friend groups, professional networks, community organizations. They essentially scorched earth their previous life and start constructing a new one somewhere else. This wholesale retreat is the narcissist's acknowledgement, never stated, but behaviorally clear, that they cannot maintain their grandiose self-image in any space where you exist or where people witness their defeat. Tears in even the memory of what happened between you, contaminates the environment for them. It makes the performance unsustainable. What this reveals, for all the narcissist claims of superiority, for all their grandiosity, for all their apparent confidence, they cannot withstand the truth being known. They cannot exist in an environment where people have seen behind the mask. Their entire psychological structure depends on controlling the narrative, and when that control is lost in a particular environment, they must abandon that environment entirely. This is also different from the typical discard because the narcissist isn't leaving from a position of power. They're not moving on to bigger and better things while making you feel left behind. They're fleeing from a position of exposure and defeat. And often this flight involves material and social costs, abandoned careers, severed relationships, financial losses from hasty relocations. The narcissist is willing to absorb these costs because the alternative, remaining in an environment where their true nature has been revealed, is psychologically unbearable. And most people don't recognize it first. It's preferable to start over with nothing in a new location than to continue existing in a space where the facade has crumbled. And there's something else that often accompanies this flight, the creation of an entirely new narrative for the new environment. Times arrives in their new location with a story about why they left, a story that, of course, positions them as the victim or the person who outgrew a limiting situation. And most people don't recognize at first, I needed a fresh start after a toxic situation. I was being held back by people who were threatened by my success. The new people in the narcissist's life have no context to question these narratives. They see someone who appears confident, accomplished, charming, someone who's starting fresh after difficulties they frame in ways that generate sympathy rather than suspicion. Narcissist gets to rebuild their false self in an environment uncorrupted by anyone who knows what really happened. But here's what this flight reveals to those who understand narcissistic pathology. The narcissist power was always illusory, depended entirely on controlling information and narrative. When you destroyed that control, when truth became visible to enough people in enough ways that the narrative couldn't be restored, the narcissist had no actual resources to draw on. Tender encoders, genuine relationships, strong enough to weather the revelation. No authentic reputation solid enough to survive the truth. No real character substantial enough to rebuild from. They had only the performance. And when the performance became impossible to maintain in that environment, they had to flee to somewhere they could perform again without contradiction. Types of patterns. When a narcissist abandons everything they've built rather than face the people who witnessed their defeat, it's not strategic repositioning. It's admission that their entire identity was a construct that couldn't survive exposure. Proof. But there's another sign of true defeat that arrives indirectly through channels you might not expect, and it often catches people off guard precisely because it comes from sources that were previously aligned with the narcissist. When you've truly defeated a narcissist, you begin receiving messages from their flying monkeys, their enablers, the people in their inner circle, but the tone and content of these messages is entirely different from what you've experienced before. Typical flying monkey communications, the ones designed to shame you, recruit you back, defend the narcissist's behavior, or gaslight you about what happened. These aren't attempts to make you feel guilty for setting boundaries or leaving. These are messages of genuine concern, sometimes bordering on alarm about the narcissist's mental state and behavior. I'm worried about them. They're not themselves. Something is really wrong, and I don't know what to do. Have you noticed how they've been acting? It's concerning. As, at first, I never fully understood what happened between you two, but now I'm seeing things that make me realize something was off. These messages represent a significant shift, and that shift is evidence of true defeat. Let me explain why. The people in the narcissist orbit, their friends, family members, colleagues, even their new supply sources, have typically only seen the curated version of the narcissist. They've witnessed the charm, the competence, the carefully managed image. Tation Chapter 6. And when you were in the narcissist side's life, when you tried to set boundaries or express concerns, these same people often sided with the narcissist. They did in the smear campaign against you, or they enabled the narcissist's behavior, or they simply didn't believe your version of events because it contradicted the image they'd been shown. But when you've truly defeated the narcissist, when you've removed yourself so completely that they've lost a crucial regulatory function, these people begin to witness behavior they've never seen before. Then most people don't recognize it first. The mask isn't just slipping occasionally, it's becoming increasingly difficult for the narcissist to maintain. And what's beneath that mask is disturbing enough that people who were previously aligned with the narcissist are now reaching out to you. Duality, instability, paranoia, or desperation that seems out of character with the person they thought they knew. They might witness the narcissist having emotional breakdowns, making erratic decisions, expressing thoughts that seem disconnected from reality, or engaging in self-destructive behavior that frightens them. Confusion and concern, they reach out to you, sometimes explicitly, seeking to understand what happened. Because on some level, they're starting to realize that your departure was connected to something real, something they're only now beginning to see. They're recognizing that maybe you weren't the problem. Maybe the narratives they accepted about you weren't accurate. Maybe the person they thought they knew isn't who they believed. This outreach is significant for several reasons. First, it represents a crack in the narcissist's controlled narrative. These people were supposed to remain convinced that you were the problem, that the narcissist was the victim or the reasonable party. But the narcissist's deterioration has become so visible that it's creating doubt in people who previously never questioned the narcissist's version of events. Second, it confirms something crucial about your role in the narcissist's life. You were providing far more stabilization than anyone realized, including possibly yourself. People now expressing concern are witnessing what the narcissist actually is without your regulatory presence, without the emotional labor you provided, without the containment you offered for their chaos. Third, it represents a form of validation that you might not have expected to receive. For so long, you might have felt gaslit, questioned, dismissed by the very people who are now reaching out with concern. Today's, even if they don't explicitly apologize or acknowledge their previous role, represent an implicit admission. Something was happening that they didn't see, and your departure revealed it. But here's what's important to understand about these communications. They're not your responsibility to respond to. These people are reaching out from their own distress, their own confusion, their own need to make sense of what they're witnessing. Pull gets hearts, and while there might be part of you that feels validated, that wants to explain what you experienced, that hopes they'll finally understand, you don't owe them that explanation. Did these people enable the narcissist's behavior, dismissed your concerns, or participated in your marginalization? They're coming to awareness now not because they believed you, but because the evidence has become too obvious for them to ignore. They're recognized at first. Their awakening is not your redemption project. What their outreach confirms is simply this. The narcissist's collapse is real, it's visible, and it's alarming enough that people who were previously invested in maintaining the narcissist's image are breaking ranks to express concern. This is evidence of a defeat so complete that the narcissist can no longer maintain the performance, even for their most loyal supporters. And there's often a particular desperation in these messages that reveals the depth of the narcissist's deterioration. They'll casually checking in, they're frightened, confused, sometimes asking for your help and managing the narcissist crisis. They're hoping you'll step back in, offer guidance, provide the stabilizing presence the narcissist has lost. But this hope reflects their fundamental misunderstanding of what happened. You didn't leave because of a misunderstanding that can be resolved. Diffusa remaining was destroying you, and the narcissist's deterioration in your absence isn't evidence that you should return. It's evidence of how much of yourself you were sacrificing to keep them functional. People who defended the narcissist start reaching out with concern about the narcissist's mental state. It's not an invitation to return. It's confirmation that you were right to leave. A defeat that's particularly unusual, one that represents a significant shift in the narcissist's typical defensive operations. And rare cases, when you've truly defeated a narcissist, they develop a new public narrative that comes surprisingly close to honesty, table accountability, that would require a level of self-confrontation most narcissists never achieve, but something that acknowledges loss, damage, and personal responsibility in ways they typically never do. Show up in social media posts, in conversations with mutual acquaintances, or in their general presentation of what happened. And the narrative shift is striking precisely because it deviates so dramatically from the narcissist's usual patterns. Typically, remember, the narcissist constructs elaborate victim narratives. They were betrayed, mistreated, their ex was crazy, their former friends were disloyal, their circumstances were uniquely unfair. They position themselves as either the wrong party or the person who magnanimously chose to move on from inferior connections. The narrative always centers their innocence or their superiority. But when truly defeated, when their usual defensive structures have been so compromised that they can't maintain the standard narrative, something different emerges. The narcissist begins talking about how they lost themselves, how they became someone they didn't recognize, how they hurt someone who didn't deserve it. They might post vague but surprisingly self-critical reflections on social media, tell people they're working on themselves in ways that imply there was genuinely something to work on. Now, let me be very clear about what this is and what it isn't. This is not genuine transformation. This is not the narcissist suddenly achieving authentic self-awareness and embarking on real healing. What this represents is a narcissist whose usual defensive narratives have been so thoroughly dismantled that they're forced to adopt a new one, and the new narrative they choose is one that involves partial admission of fault. Why would they do this? Caning complete denial in the face of overwhelming evidence has become untenable. Too many people witnessed the truth. The deterioration was too visible. The defeat was too complete. Continuing to claim they did nothing wrong, that they were purely victimized, that the other person was the problem. These narratives no longer hold up even to casual scrutiny. So the narcissist adapts, stations some level of responsibility, but frames it in ways that still serve their needs. I lost myself implies they were once better and can be again. I lost myself implies they were once better and can be again. I became someone then I recognized suggests the bad behavior was an aberration, not their consistent pattern. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. It admits harm but often comes with implicit requests for credit for this admission. At first, this narrative serves several functions for the defeated narcissist. Toria has a new form of supply. Sympathy for someone who's struggling with their demons, admiration for someone who's brave enough to admit their faults, attention from people who see them as doing the work of growth and change. Second, it allows them to maintain some control over the narrative. Yes, they're admitting fault, but they're the ones defining what that fault was, how it happened, and what it means. They're still the author of their story, just telling a different version than before. Third, it creates a pathway for potential future reconciliation or the acquisition of new supply, who find this apparently self-aware, growth-oriented version of the narcissist compelling. I made mistakes, but I'm working on myself now becomes a new form of manipulation. one that appears more psychologically sophisticated than the old defenses. But here's what this narrative shift reveals. The narcissist's defenses have been fundamentally compromised. For them to abandon their usual patterns of complete denial and victim positioning means that maintaining those patterns was causing more damage to their image than admitting partial responsibility. Defeat of their grandiose self, even if the admission is strategic rather than authentic. And there's often a performative quality to this new narrative that reveals its defensive function. The narcissist might post frequently about their journey of self-discovery, share quotes about growth and healing, reference therapy or self-help in ways designed to be noticed. They're not doing the quiet, private work. Transformation, they're publicizing a performance of transformation that serves many of the same functions their old defenses served. People who witness this shift often feel confused. Is this real growth? Should I give them credit for this awareness? Does this admission change what happened? And these are legitimate questions, but the answer usually reveals itself over time. The behavior doesn't actually change in substantial ways. The patterns reemerge with new justifications. The growth remains theoretical rather than demonstrated through consistent different choices. What the shift does confirm, though, is the completeness of your defeat of them. You disrupted their psychological functioning so thoroughly that they had to abandon their primary defensive narratives and adopt new ones. The old stories, I did nothing wrong, they were the problem, became impossible to maintain. That represents a fundamental victory, even if the narcissist's new narrative is itself another form of defense. For you observing this shift, the appropriate response is probably continued distance and skepticism. The narcissist adopting a surprisingly honest-sounding narrative doesn't obligate you to re-engage, to offer forgiveness, to give them credit for awareness they're performing rather than embodying. Ports plays, what it does offer is confirmation. You didn't just hurt them or anger them, you defeated them so completely that their entire defensive structure had to be rebuilt with different materials, even if the underlying pathology remains unchanged. When a narcissist's defeat is so total they can no longer claim innocence, they don't embrace accountability, they perform, it turning even admission into a tool for renewed control. But there's one final sign that you've truly defeated a narcissist, and it's the most reliable indicator of all, not because of anything the narcissist D. In the next minutes pervenue, when you've genuinely defeated them, when you've extracted yourself completely and established true psychological sovereignty, you realize something profound. You feel nothing of suppression, where you're forcing down feelings that still churn beneath the surface, not the nothing of avoidance where you're carefully not thinking about them, because thinking about them still hurts. Ton of performed indifference, where you're trying to convince yourself and others that you're over it while secretly still being affected. This is genuine indifference. Complete neutrality, the kind of nothing you feel toward people who simply aren't relevant to your life anymore. Be the hardest concept to convey to people who are still in the thick of healing from narcissistic abuse. Because when you're in that space, the idea of true indifference seems impossible. The narcissist occupies so much psychological real estate in your thoughts, your emotions, your processing of what happened. And at first, even your anger at them, your satisfaction at their downfall, your hope that they're suffering consequences, all of that is still a form of emotional investment. It's still them taking up space in your inner world. Both their defeat and your victory arrives when that investment completely dissolves. You think about them, if you think about them at all, the way you might think about a stranger you once knew briefly. Charge, no activation, no residual emotion. They become psychologically irrelevant. You might hear through mutual acquaintances that they're struggling, and you feel nothing. No satisfaction, no serves them right, no sense of vindication, just nothing. Their struggles don't validate you, because you no longer need validation from their suffering. Or you, teens, they men so, bind here, they're doing well, found new supply, seem happy in photos, and you feel nothing. No jealousy, no anger that they didn't value what they had with you, no sense of injustice, just nothing. Their apparent success doesn't threaten you because it has no connection to your worth or your life. You have run into them unexpectedly, and after the initial startle of an unexpected encounter, you realize there's no emotional reaction, no anxiety, no anger, no hope for closure or acknowledgement. They're just a person you used to know, and that knowledge doesn't carry emotional weight anymore. This is the truest form of defeat. You can inflict on a narcissist because it means they no longer exist as a significant figure in your psychological landscape. They're not your villain, not your cautionary tale, not the person you're proving something to. They're simply no one to you. And here's why this matters so much. The narcissist's power over you always depended on your emotional investment. Was love, fear, anger, hope for change, desire for acknowledgement. Any of it gave them a kind of presence in your life. Any of it gave them a kind of presence in your life. Even your justified rage at how they treated you, even your satisfaction at watching consequences catch up to them. These were forms of ongoing relationship, ongoing engagement with them as a significant figure. But indifference, difference, means they've been fully metabolized and released. They're not a wound you're nursing, not a wrong you're still writing, not a chapter you're still processing. They're history that no longer informs your present. This is also how you know you're not just performing healing or recovery. You've actually achieved it, because performed recovery still has the narcissist at its center. Look how well I'm doing without them. Still makes them the reference point. Look how much better my life is now. Still positions your current life in relationship to them. But genuine recovery means they're not the reference point for anything. Your life isn't better compared to when you were with them. It's just good on its own terms without them as context. Something liberating about recognizing this indifference when it arrives, because for so long, you might have been waiting to feel vindicated, waiting to see them suffer consequences, waiting for some external validation that what you experienced was real and wrong and deserved accountability. People don't recognize it first, but indifference means you no longer need any of that. What happened happened, you've processed it and integrated it, and you've moved forward into a life where they simply don't matter. TKs. This also means you're no longer vulnerable to hoovering attempts if they occur, because the narcissist hoovering tactics, the apologies, the promises of change, the love bombing, the reminders of good times, these only work if you still care, and at first, if some part of you still hopes they might become who you once believed they could be, if some part of you wants acknowledgement or closure, or recognition of how they hurt you. But indifference means none of those hopes have anywhere to land. To mask the narcissist's attempts to re-engage, if they try, simply bounce off your complete lack of investment in them. You're not resisting them. Resistance requires effort and implies they still have pull. You're just not interested at all, and they have to offer. This state of genuine indifference is often described by people who've achieved it as feeling lighter, freer, finally put down a weight they didn't fully realize they were carrying. This doesn't just occupy space when you're actively thinking about them. They occupy space in your defensive posture, your hypervigilance, your constant processing and analyzing and protecting yourself against them. When you reach indifference, all of that dissolves. You're not defending against them anymore because there's nothing to defend against. They're no threat, no concern, no factor in your decision-making or your emotional landscape. They become as irrelevant as any random person you don't know and have no connection to. And this complete psychological irrelevance is the ultimate defeat, because you've destroyed them, but because you've removed them so thoroughly from mattering to you that whether they're destroyed or thriving, struggling, or succeeding, it has no impact on your well-being whatsoever. The narcissist is truly defeated not when they collapse, but when their collapse becomes something you learn about the way you'd hear about weather in a city you'll never visit, information that simply doesn't concern you.